Great. So, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. Small but select, and definitely the right people in the room today. So, welcome to another Armed Forces Children and Young People Conversations webinar today about play and hobbies. So, thanks for joining. We are a small group today, so hopefully lots of interaction. But if we can keep our microphones on mute until you're invited to speak, just to minimize the background noise. If you lose connection, just rejoin using the same link. We are small enough that I might just get us to introduce ourselves in a little bit, but you can just use the chat function just to let us know your name and organization, and any questions during the session, particularly because we are a small group, just jump in, raise your hand, anything, and we'll get you at an appropriate point. So why have we decided to talk about play and hobbies? First and foremost, the importance of play is recognised internationally. Article 31 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child sets out that every child has the right to relax, play, and participate in cultural and artistic activities. For children in armed forces families, however, the experience of this right is often shaped by the distinctive circumstances of being in a forces family, and it's therefore important to consider both the opportunities and challenges that service life creates in relation to play. So we know that armed forces children can have access to unique opportunities that enhance their experience of play. Overseas postings, exposure to new cultures, languages, environments, the opportunities to broaden horizons and create memorable childhood experiences. One of our staff who spent some time as a child on Falkland Islands talks about how normal it was to just move around by helicopter. And when she moved back to England, and she was writing things saying that she had gone somewhere by helicopter, her teacher kept crossing it out and saying, no, that's not right, you've got that wrong. So, really amazing experiences. Um, Within the United Kingdom, young people tell us a lot about a sense of safety and community that comes with being on or near a military base, that can encourage informal play, perhaps younger than would be experienced in other communities, and lots of shared activities and understanding among children. We hear accounts all the time about people growing up on the patch that highlight the freedom of being able to gather with peers, play outdoors, and develop such strong bonds. Um, the ability to play in a really supportive community while learning about that surrounding wildlife and environments can be really valuable, particularly for those who have those sort of more rural postings. At the same time, the particular nature of forces life can restrict opportunities for play. Jude and I had a conversation recently about where when she was in Northern Ireland and living off base, that to take her then 4-year-old to play with his forces friends behind the base meant passing through separate security gates, which made that opportunity for spontaneous play really difficult, and it can create some barriers around maintaining friendships as well. So frequent relocations add another layer of difficulty. If you move regularly, you can find it challenging to sustain friendships or involvement in hobbies. We hear, one young person who was based in Canada and really got into playing ice hockey when they moved back to Scotland, that opportunity wasn't available to them. And moving into areas where some clubs or activities are oversubscribed can mean young people being on waiting lists for a very long time and perhaps not getting to the top of that waiting list before they move again. We've heard too that service family accommodation can have a significant factor in play. Many children report that the quality of the housing, the really limited space in houses, and the inadequate play facilities on the patch can affect that capacity to play freely. And for those with mobility difficulties or additional needs, that lack of accessible housing further restricts opportunities to play at home. Deployment can represent another dimension of challenge. Some young people talk to us about how the importance of play is heightened during deployment for sustaining well-being, but actually they can miss out on some traditional types of play, such as rough and tumble play for younger ones, or being able to physically access, because many say their non-serving parent don't drive, and when their parent who drives is deployed, they lose that ability to physically get to clubs and activities. Heather, I'm sure we'll talk more in a little bit, but there can be some really good practical play tools to support children to maintain connection with deployed parents, such as deployment dolls, and other strategies such as rough and tumble play and communication in play, can be really valuable. And I have no doubt Heather will talk to us about that in a little bit. So the voices of children and young people themselves provide clear insight into the importance of play. Comments such as you can join clubs and then you have to leave, or sometimes there's nothing when you move, like dancing, illustrate the frustration of disrupted hobbies. Other emphasize the strain of distance from school clubs or difficulty in managing when one parent's deployed and the other parent is unwell, while the issues of where to play or socialize on or near bases also come up. One young person said there should be more places for children to all socialize together without it being a rundown welfare building that is rarely even open. Sorry, Sarah. We can talk to Erin after. We have a little short video that we'd like to play. This has been put together, a cut and paste between a couple of other videos that we released as part of our rights report. It's not just their job, it's our whole life. So Jude's just going to play that really quickly for us, just to set the scene as well and bring the young people's voices into the room, always important. Jude, you're looking very worried there. You're on mute as well.
Yeah, apologies. It wasn't allowing me to go into it, but just give me 2 seconds. My computer is now playing up.
Right, let's just leave it. We can
Yeah,
pop it out for people
apologies.
to have a watch later on. We
Yeah.
did share it on LinkedIn a little while ago, so we'll just leave it for now.
I don't know why.
So I was going to say these reflections reinforce that play is an extra optional extra. So the reflection that talks about, and then when you see the video, but it is a really essential aspect to children's lives, and it contributes to well-being, social development, resilience, amongst many other things, and just enjoyment of life. So evidence demonstrates that play for forces children is more than recreation. It's a means of connection, continuity, and coping with the context of mobility and parental deployment. And the co-production of the Forces Children's Rights Charter underlines that young people themselves have articulated their need to fully access their right to play within the force community. So to help explore these themes further, I'm really pleased to be joined by a panel of excellent colleagues today who'll bring their valuable perspectives. So Jude, our learning and development worker here at Forces Children Scotland, will begin by giving us an overview of policy affecting play in Scotland today. Jude also brings that personal insight of having experienced how spontaneous play can be hard to access when living outside the wire as a military spouse and mother to 2 children growing up in Forces life. I'm delighted to welcome Amy Woodhouse, Chief Executive for Parenting Across Scotland and former Head of Policy and Projects and Participation at Children in Scotland. When Amy was still at Children in Scotland and just moving into PAS, she was successful in being given a Churchill Fellowship, which gave her the amazing opportunity of visiting Finland and Iceland to study the hobby guarantees in those countries and to think about how we could bring access to hobbies here in Scotland. So really looking forward to hearing from Amy about what she learnt during that Churchill Fellowship. Also delighted to be joined by Heather Armstrong, co-CEO of Starcatchers. Heather has a background of over 8 years working with young people from some of Glasgow's most deprived communities. She's a strong advocate for the transformative power of arts to tackle inequality and support children's development. At Starcatcher, Heather leads the Big People We Feelings project, which supports young children, early years children experiencing separation and deployment by helping them explore how creative movement and play can help early years children understand and express their feelings. And we'll be hearing lots more about that project in a little bit. And finally, really delighted to welcome Sarah McGee, Sarah's a senior community development worker from the Army Welfare Service. She's currently based in Aldershot. Sarah plays a pivotal role in local communities through initiatives such as youth clubs, family events, and support groups. Her work demonstrates how play and hobbies can create a sense of belonging and empowerment. And having moved between Scottish and English bases, Sarah completely understands the impact of transitions. So before we formally move to Jude, I'm going to ask a question that I want you to keep in your mind. So how can we, as doing the role that we're doing here on this call, ensure that babies, children, and young people from armed forces families are able to access their right to play and pursue hobbies in a meaningful and consistent way? And I hope that through today's discussions, we'll not only explore the challenges, but able to identify some practical steps and strategies to ensure that play remains a source of adaptability, belonging, and growth for forces. So without further ado, I'm going to have a move over to Jude just now, just moving some things in my screen. Jude, um, the Scottish Government's Play Vision Statement and Action Plan 2025 to 2030 sets out an ambitious vision for ensuring that all children in Scotland have access to high quality play opportunities. Could you talk us through the key principles and actions outlined in the plan, especially those focused on inclusion? And could you have a think about or tell us about how the commitment aligns to children's rights and what it might mean in practice for forces children who, as we've already heard, have some real challenges at times in accessing play due to disruption, mobility, and emotional challenges?
Of course, you can hear me okay now. Yes, apologies, my computer was playing up earlier on. We'll maybe watch the clip at the end. Well, thank you for the question. And I think it's great we're discussing this today with the International Day of Play, which happened a couple of months ago in June, and of course the release of the Scottish Government's Play Vision Statement and Action Plan being released in May of this year, which builds upon the Play Strategy, the 2013 document. And before I answer the question, I've shared a link in the chat so that anyone interested in the Play Vision Statement can explore the full document. There's also a lovely child-friendly version available and posters with some beautiful illustrations. I also want to highlight the Play Scotland website. Please access the website. It's got wonderful resources and lots of information about play ideas. As I mentioned earlier, I also attended a webinar earlier this week around the play plan, hosted by Children in Scotland with guest speaker Cherie Morgan, who's the director of projects at Play Scotland, who went into great depth about the plan. And indeed, if you want to know further about the plan and your role as a practitioner or parent, I would get in touch with her. She knows lots about it, and it was great to hear from her earlier on. So the plan is a significant piece of work and builds upon the themes highlighted in the Play Strategy of 2013. What's especially important is that it isn't just a plan about play, it's a vision for children's well-being, rights and inclusion, and that makes it incredibly relevant to armed forces families. And actually, it's been mentioned that actually in Scotland, we are really, really ahead with regards to our play policy. So it is a real significant piece of work. For many children, as we've heard in armed forces families, play is far more than just leisure time. It can often serve as an essential source of stability and emotional support. When children are dealing with the pressures of frequent relocations, disrupted friendships, or the emotional stress of a parent being deployed, play becomes a space for processing, connection, and stability. It helps them feel safe, be creative, rebuild relationships, and simply be children in the face of huge life transitions, as we know happens throughout being in an armed forces family. So as we look at the new national play strategy, we need to ask, how do we ensure it works for armed forces children whose lives are shaped by service-related mobility and change? So firstly, let's just look at what is outlined in the play vision statement. So it sets out a bold ambition and states that our vision for Scotland is that play is welcomed, celebrated and nurtured. that every child is able to play across all stages and aspects of their life to support their social development, resilience, language and communication development, health, physical and mental well-being. And it's rooted in the UNCRC, so the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which, as we all know, has been now incorporated into Scots law as of last year. So this gives play legal status as a right. It's not just an optional extra. So key articles include Article 31, as Meg mentioned at the start, so the right to rest, leisure and play. Article 12, the right to express views and to be taken seriously. And Article 15, which recognises a child's right to freedom of association and peaceful assembly, meaning they can meet with others, join groups and participate in peaceful protests. So when we talk about play, we're really talking about rights, inclusion, belonging and well-being, all of which are vital for Armed Forces children. What are some of the key principles of the play statement, the play vision statement? So play, first of all, is a right. All children have the right to play, as we've just discussed, every day, everywhere. Another principle is inclusion and equity. So barriers to play must be identified and removed. And I think it's also important to note the difference between inclusion and accessibility. So although a play space may be accessible, it might not necessarily be an inclusive play environment. It was quite interesting hearing that conversation happening earlier in the week. So just to bear that in mind. Another principle is that children's voices matter. So children and young people should help shape how and where play happens. And the action plan did thoroughly involve children and young people. And it's wonderful to see the child-friendly version of the action plan as well. Another important principle is that play happens everywhere. So not just in a play park, but in homes, schools, hospitals, communities, it happens everywhere. And ultimately adults have a role. So parents, practitioners and policymakers must all support play. For Armed Forces children, these principles hit home when a child has moved or has moved a school multiple times. Play might be their only constant. Their ability to access safe, familiar and emotionally supportive play spaces shouldn't depend on where they're posted to next. The plan sets out the play theory of change, which you can actually see if you go to page 6 in the document. It's got a really nice visual and outlines the plan theory of change in detail if you want to have a look at it, which is on page 6 of the document. And the first area it comments on is parents and carers. So the plan commits to supporting parents to understand the value of play and how they can encourage it, especially in the early years. For Armed Forces families, this support is critical. Relocation is not just hard on children, it's also stressful for parents who may be unfamiliar with the area or juggling the logistics of deployment. So how can we best support a parent who is on their own while the serving parent is away in deployment? And as we'll hear from Heather soon, in Helensburgh, Star Captures is running a great project to support Armed Forces families, helping parents and practitioners play confidently with their babies and toddlers, even during times of separation. And that's exactly the kind of creative, inclusive practice that the plan wants to see more of. And it's great to see it happening in the Armed Forces community today. The second area of action is places. So this focuses on creating safe, accessible and inclusive play spaces across Scotland, from urban playgrounds to rural woodland areas. For Armed Forces children, place really matters. Many live in MOD housing, which can be behind fences or away from town centres. And if they've just moved to a new community, it can be hard to know where to go or feel confident joining in. They also may hesitate to fully engage if they know another move is coming soon as well. They might just think, well, what's the point? Because I'm going to move, so I'm not going to bother going to that space to play and meet new people. And also young people have described the challenge of living behind the wire on a base. They commented that civilian school friends would have to be signed into camp, which can sometimes feel can sometimes be a bit uncomfortable. And in my own personal experience, when we lived outside the Wire, it was very difficult to get into the main camp because we had to go through several security barriers. And as Meg said at the start, that did prevent spontaneous play for my young children. So it's just keeping that in mind with regards to places. Also, as Meg mentioned, moving, it's hard to maintain hobbies, join clubs, or build long-term friendships. So the plan talks about inclusive design and access, and it's important that local authorities and play providers think about how they can reach out to armed forces families and include children in planning and decision making. And finally, the plan highlights the need for training support for professionals, including teachers, early years workers, social workers, and health staff, so they understand the importance of play and can promote it in an inclusive, trauma-informed way. So a child whose parent has just deployed may be experiencing anxiety, sleep disruption, or clinginess, and they might not know how to talk about it. But through imaginative or physical play, they can express those emotions and regain a sense of control. And finally, linked to all of this in the plan play vision statement is inclusion, which is at the heart of the plan. So one of the most powerful things about this is that inclusion is not an add-on, it's woven through every part of the vision. And it doesn't just mean opening the gates. The inclusion doesn't mean that. It means actively identifying and removing barriers that stop some children from playing and replacing them with tailored support. And we've already discussed some of them in the Armed Forces context. So that's why it's so important to bring in a lived experience lens to inclusion to understand what play looks like from the child's perspective. And this is where the Forces Children's Rights Charter, developed by young people from Armed Forces families, becomes a really useful tool. So co-designed with children and young people, it highlights what they want and need from adults and services. And I'll pop the icon about I can do my interests and hobbies with the people who matter to me. And I'll pop that in the chat later. So the statements in the charter are supported by the Play Vision's goals. However, Armed Forces children are rarely mentioned explicitly in mainstream policies. So unless there is deliberate focus, there needs risk being overlooked. So just to bear that in mind. So even with a strong national plan, there are still real challenges for Armed Forces children accessing play. And we can't expect children to overcome these challenges alone. It's up to adults at national, local, and community level to create inclusive structures. So what could this look like? Well, thinking about it, it could mean flexible access, so open doors for mid-year arrivals to clubs, groups, and services. The amount of times I've gone to a different posting and there's a massive waiting list and there isn't a hope of getting onto it. So flexible access would be great. Welcome strategies, so use buddy systems or welcome clubs to help children settle. Also emotional support through play, so equip practitioners to use play as a tool for connection and expression. And accessible info for families, so share clear localised guides to play spaces, especially after a move. And finally, training for professionals, so build understanding of service life across education, health and social care. So to sum up, the Play Vision and Action Plan is a strong, inclusive and rights-driven framework that places play at the heart of childhood in Scotland. It recognises play as a right and is something that underpins everything from wellbeing and confidence to inclusion and adaptability. But to make that vision real for Armed Forces children, we need to design for it, plan for it and deliver it in ways that recognise these young people's unique experiences. Because whether a child has moved once or 10 times, whether their parent is at home or overseas, they deserve to feel included, supported, and able to play freely. And the plan promises that, and it's up to all of us, which it highlights throughout the statement, to make sure that promise reaches every child in every part of Scotland. So it is a good read, so you should really go back and have a look at it.
Excellent. Thanks, Jude. Jude, as you were speaking, it also struck me that right, that Article 29 right about education and an education that fosters children's talents and beyond just
Mhm.
maths, and that actually hobbies and play can play a really significant role for forces children in that too, who have lost often or had disconnections in their learning opportunities at school and want to have different ways of demonstrating achievements, that actually hobbies and play can have a really significant role there too, isn't it? Did that come up in the play strategy at all, that link to education, or
Yeah, I think again that just linking into, I suppose, the places aspect, and that the whole community around the child and the opportunities that are there. So yes, certainly. And I suppose if you are at a posting and you are involved in a club, like I don't know, something I'm thinking about, shinty's coming off the top of my head, like something that's associated with that area, you might develop a passion for it, and then you can't maybe continue that on because, or cricket, I know we mentioned that in one of our animations. So, but these are important because, if a child or a young person does develop that, and ice hockey, as you said, that can
Hmm.
stop for that young person. So,
I was just thinking about that bit, isn't it? In the Hayward Review, for those who aren't familiar, the Hayward Review was a review of Scottish education system, suggesting a number of different ways that children could show their attainment and achievement, and allowed young people to actually keep their own wee diary of things that they had done. And actually, for forces children, that ability to pick up what they may have done in lots of different places or cultures and have some recognition of that becomes
yeah.
really important. I wonder, and I suspect, Amy, you might cover some of that over from what you have learnt. So I will just change the spotlighting bit here. Um, so, Amy, you did recently complete your Churchill Fellowship research, the increasing children and young people's access to hobby and leisure activities. I absolutely loved reading it. I loved hearing you talk about it and the enthusiasm, and some of those photographs of all of the cool things you got to experience while you were there, which was amazing. So, be really interested to know that from your perspective, what do you think access to play and hobbies is
Mhm.
important for in developing children's wellbeing and development? Can you
Mhm.
share us a little bit about what your findings were and why you think they matter, but specifically why you think they might matter to children from forces families, respecting, of course, that forces families is not your area of expertise. But I know we've had some chats before now to sort of make some of those connections.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm listening as well as going to be talking. So already what you've said today about things about the barriers and also the opportunities and also the positive things about living in forces families and how children and young people can make the most of those in terms of engaging with hobbies too is really, really interesting and helpful for me to know. So yeah, hello everybody. I'm Amy, if you've not met me before. As Meg said, the Chief Executive Parenting across Scotland, and I love hobbies and always have done, and have done many of them over the years myself. But my background is as a mental health researcher for many, many years. And through that work, came to understand the impact that the arts and sports and hobbies can have on mental health and well-being. And there's such a bounty of evidence around that. We don't need to question that anymore. We have more evidence than we need to show about the impact that these activities can have on mental health and well-being for everybody, not just children and people, for adults as well, and regardless of who your background is. And but for some reason, we still do not invest significantly in them to the extent that we could do. So we're not maximizing the impact that these activities can have on children and young people. And it was through an international exchange in Finland around children and young people's mental health when I was at Children in Scotland, that I came to understand how Finland was investing nationally in increasing access to hobbies, because they understood that hobby activities for children and young people um, could improve their well-being, and they were worried about the well-being of children in Finland at that time. And it's through that I also came to understand that they were not the only country that has nationally invested in hobbies, and that actually Iceland has been doing this since the 1990s. There's a long, long track record of investing in hobbies under something called the Icelandic model of prevention. For those of you who maybe know Planet Youth in Scotland, they have been working with Iceland on bringing the Icelandic approach. But broadly speaking, in the 90s, children and young people in Iceland had very high rates of alcohol use, other harmful behaviours, risk-taking behaviours, and they were worried about what to do about it, and saw hobbies as being part of the response. It's not the only response in Iceland. They also do work with families and in schools as well, but they saw that giving children and young people something positive to do with their spare time had a role in terms of directing them into positive options for their and healthy options for their lives, and it was incredibly successful. And you can there's lots of evidence about the graphs and that have shown that from going from one of the countries with the highest levels of health harming behaviours in Europe, they're now one of the lowest. It's really been very, very impactful. And so when I learned about these approaches, felt, oh my goodness, we should be doing things similar in Scotland. We should be investing in hobbies and making sure that particularly that the children, young people that don't have access to them in Scotland do, because undoubtedly we've got lots of hobbies in Scotland. Children can, I'm sure, take part in lots and lots of different things, but many of them have a cost attached. And it also depends on where you live. And it depends on whether you have a disability or not. And it depends whether you're a forces family or not. There's lots of barriers to taking part. So what I believe in investing at a national level would be about how we ensure that everybody can take part in hobbies. And there is a lot to learn from other countries that have gone about it. And I'll put the link to my report in the chat so you can read about the details of the two approaches that I studied, Finland and Iceland. They have different ways of doing things. There's pros and cons to each, but the principle of it behind it is about how you increase access for children and young people. People ask me all the time, what do I mean about hobby? Which is probably worth just saying a little bit about, because we know that hobbies can mean various different things. We've talked about clubs and groups, but they can also be things that you do by yourself in your bedroom or in your own space. But both of these countries have put some parameters around it. So when they're talking about hobbies, they're talking about group activities that take place outside of the home, run by a trained professional, and they see that as being very important, trained in youth work principles so that in practice, so that they are building the essence of youth work into the hobbies that are provided and that are run over a particularly long period of time. So by that, they're talking about children and young people not engaging in one-off things, what children and young people engaging in hobbies over months, years, possibly even. And it's those elements that they feel gives the extra punch to the impact that hobbies can have for children and young people. And I guess within the context of forces families, where families are moving around, that's one of the challenges, isn't it? If you're getting more impact through sustained engagement over time, but you're not able to take that group with you, how do we make sure that forces families are getting the same impact that others are? So there's lots of learning from both of those countries. Since I've come back, I've been having conversations with lots of people, gathering lots of views about what could happen in Scotland. Lots of people are very enthusiastic about it because they get it. That's never really a problem. Is people are go yeah, then that sounds really great. It's how we do it is the challenge. How we fund it is the challenge, and how we give it enough esteem, I think, is probably part of the challenge as well. So part of the advantages that Finland and Iceland had was that they had public support behind investing in hobbies. They understood as a nation what hobbies could do for children and young people and felt that hobbies should be part of every childhood. And I don't know if we have that national understanding quite yet. I think on an individual conversation basis, people get it, but I don't know when people are talking about budget decisions and hard budget decisions, you would get that consensus that actually this is a really wise investment to be made. So that's part of the role that we've got now, is to try and build that case for it and build the momentum behind it. So Lisa's here today from Young Scot, and Lisa and I, our organisations and some others as well, have been meeting informally to try and build the evidence behind hobbies. We did a parenting survey over the summer asking for parents' views about what hobbies do for their children and what the barriers and are to that, and what would help. And Young Scot have been doing something similar with young people. I can't wait to find out what the results are. I haven't heard them yet. So we're slowly trying to build the case. It would be great to get forces families involved in that as well, so that when we come to the point, which we will do, about when we're designing that model of hobbies for Scotland, that we're making it reflect the needs of forces children as well, so that they're included in it, and that flexibility to respond to their particular circumstances is built into whatever we do. Yeah, so I'm sorry, I'm just rambling quite a lot, so please interject and ask me questions.
Not rambling at all, Amy. Really, really fascinating. I think, for me, I mean, you and I have had some conversations about this already. So there's lots of things that resonate in my head as the parent of two neurospicy children who join nothing. I'm curious to know how a hobby guarantee works for those children who are less inclined to join those more formal groups. And I think that can reflect a lot of forces children too, who feel like, because they move around so much and they're constantly making new connections, sometimes they kind of get to the point of thinking, I can't be bothered doing this again. So curious to know
Yeah.
how that would work if it is that structured approach that the other countries have applied.
Yeah. So, I mean, I suppose I don't have a specific model that I am
Mm.
pushing. So that is still to TBC in Scotland. I think we have to shape that together. So I'm not going to tell you what the answer is to that, because I think that needs to be co-produced, doesn't it? Um, but how Finland and Iceland responded to that? Well, Finland provide hobbies in school after school. So one of the ways that they have gone about increasing access is making it just practically easy for everybody. So children are in school, and then the school day finishes, and the school day is shorter in Finland than it is in Scotland, and then you will go directly to your hobby. So parents don't have to do all that driving, picking up, dropping off, and children don't need to, think about where they're going next. They know where they're going. And then you do your hobby, and then you go home after that. Now that works really quite well for younger children, sort of primary school age children, that the high levels of uptake. Less popular with teenagers, because teenagers don't necessarily want to be in schools longer than they have to be. So they've started to think about, okay, maybe we should make it available in other settings as well, just to give teenagers that bit more choice. They've also, as part of the flexibility, started to work with organisations that are engaging with particular groups of young people who might not feel that school is the best setting for them. They may not be in school for whatever reason, or they just like they have their own spaces. So there's an organisation working with young deaf people in Helsinki that do their own hobby provision, and there's an organisation working with families of African origin that do something similar, and they are just given some funding through this model to commission hobby services. So they would commission hobby providers to come in and deliver
Mm.
the hobbies in their organisations. So I guess that's another way in which they're kind of trying to
And
increase access.
I'm assuming, no, one should never assume, does it? Because it does make an ass out of you and me. But I'm assuming that because it's a national approach, that there's a joined upness in terms of that whole systems piece. So like the rural bit around that is so big in Finland and Iceland. So when you were talking about that bit about doing it straight after school and then they go home, actually we already hear from a lot of forces children, because of the nature of bases being in much more remote locations, that the school bus already doesn't allow them to stay back to play rugby because they miss the school bus and then they can't get home. So I'm assuming that one of the pluses in that national approach in Finland and Iceland is that joined upness across other services. So the transport system works to make that happen, for example.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because they talked a lot about this. So it's been clearly a big challenge for them for that very reason that some of their so it's all run. I mean, just there's a na national coordination, but then it's coordinated at a municipality level. So there's about 280 odd municipalities in Finland. Some of them have a population of 50. So some of them are very, very small. And then Helsinki is also a municipality. So the variety is huge. But yeah, so some of in the rural communities, children are getting maybe like a 1 hour bus journey each way. So their days are already 2 hours longer than children that can just walk to school. And so they talked a lot about whether they should be doing it after school because it would add more to their day. They've got around it, and some schools are providing the hobbies at lunchtime instead, so that it's not making the day longer. That's not universally popular either because it's taking away opportunities for free play. So I don't know that they've necessarily nailed that in a way that everybody would be happy with. They're having to try and make some compromises around it all. But yeah, it's definitely something. School buses and how school buses feature is a big is a big issue for them. Yeah. But no, and also getting the times of the changes of the school buses has been more problematic than they've thought. And interestingly, in Iceland, this is just a little side fact, which is very interesting, is they're really struggling to get school buses in Iceland because they're all being used by tourists for tours of the Golden Circle and everything. So they're it is a whole system. It really is.
Yeah.
And that yeah, one part can make the other part more difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. Really helpful. Thanks, Amy. I'm sure lots of people have questions at the end, but I'll move on to the next speaker just now, if that's okay. And thank you, Lisa, for highlighting the survey. I know Nina does have it, and we will get it out to the young people just as we did to the parents, Amy, for your survey. So moving on to Heather, Jude has messaged me to say, yet again, I'm really bad at sharing this because I get really fascinated and ask fascinating questions that are fascinating for me. So I will try and stick a bit better to time. But Heather, definitely don't want to rush you. So would really love to hear from you about We People Big Feelings, the way what you've understood from that focus on play about supporting the emotional well-being for the children. What was it that practitioners and caregivers needed to know and learn and be supported to do that kind of nurturing, and just why you think it has such an important role for babies, particularly from forces families. Yeah, really looking forward to hearing.
Thanks, Meg. I suppose it's important to start off by saying that play is how babies and young children learn about the world, how they make sense of the world, and actually probably older children as well, actually. But for the purposes of today, I'll be talking about the wee ones. Both in terms of kind of physically, if you think about when a toddler first goes into like a big space, one of the first things they often want to do is like run and shout, and for adults that can be annoying, but actually what they're doing is they're measuring the space with their bodies and with the audio. So things like that I always find really fascinating. But also kind of socially and emotionally, it's how play is how wee ones start to understand the world. So back 2021, 22, I was approached by the then manager of Scott's Corner Early Learning in Pennycook, specifically to talk about forces children and all the transitions that they face. I was introduced to the emotional cycle of deployment and some of the kind of the understanding around that, which was really interesting. And the then manager, Diane, was saying, we really need some resources to help support wee ones, their families, and early years practitioners with this emotional cycle of deployment. But because of the age and stage we're looking at kind of like roughly 2 to 5, you know, the kind of tried and tested approaches of having time to talk about it and, you know, kind of special groups wasn't necessarily going to work. And so Diane asked me, like, is there a more creative approach we could take to developing emotional literacy? To which I said, yes, absolutely. We made it really clear from the start that this wasn't about kind of crisis intervention, if that makes sense. So when we're looking at the emotional cycle of deployment, we were never thinking, well, let's make up a dance that you can do when you're sad when daddy goes away, for instance. It was never about that. We were really clear from the beginning that actually by taking this creative, play-based approach to kind of emotional literacy and helping the wee ones, it was about every day. It was about giving the settings and the families ideas and ways they could play every single day to help build these skills. We were lucky enough to be funded by the Ministry of Defence for a year. So we had mostly a creative movement practitioner working in the nursery, although we also did some music and some kind of storytelling and imaginative play as well. And some of the kind of learning that came out of that project was really, really valuable. You mentioned rough and tumble, which was a really important part of the practice that we developed over that year. I think sometimes when we think about emotions or difficult times, we think about it starting in our heads. But for wee children and actually for adults as well, often your emotions start as kind of sensations in your body. And actually what we then do is kind of like make sense of them. So the example I always use is you could be all sweaty palmed and your stomach could be churning. But the context and the understanding really matters. So if you're feeling that way and you're wearing a white dress and you're about to walk down an aisle, you'd like to hope that it's because you're nervous but excited about getting married. If you're feeling the same way and you're standing, you know, in a dock facing a judge, it might be for very, very different reasons. So one of the first things we really focused on was kind of physicality, helping wee ones tune into their own bodies, understand their own bodies properly, and really like feel the sensations. But also, I think recognizing that sometimes for very small children, you know, when they're feeling strong emotions, sometimes it is about a kind of physical response, which is really where the kind of the rough and tumble or the big movement play comes in. So this idea that if wee ones are quite dysregulated, often it's moving their bodies that are going to help them work through those feelings. And what we found quite often was with the work with Sky, the creative movement artist, wee ones would start by going through the different emotions almost like physically, and once they'd worked through them they could then segue into more kind of imaginative play, more kind of verbal play, and starting to kind of process things then. But often they needed that kind of physical outlet first. And the nursery were really good actually. They got to the point where wee ones were able to, all they had kind of soft mats that they laid out specifically for kind of big movement play. Wee ones could get to the point where if you could tell they were getting a bit stressed or upset, all they had to do was go and touch the mats. The practitioners knew to bring them out, and then, you know, then they could work physically through how they were feeling, and then often segue into kind of more kind of like imaginative play or kind of conversations after that. The other really lovely thing that came out of that big movement play was as the wee ones kind of went through it, you could see their kind of social development really blossoming. Part of big movement play is moving your body in big ways. And I think the fear sometimes with adults is that they're all just going to end up clobbering each other, but they actually got really good at picking up on each other's cues in terms of who wanted to keep wrestling or who needed a bit of space. Obviously, the practitioners and the artists helped with that, but you know, they really quickly, for quite small children, got a kind of really good understanding of what the boundaries were with the other children as well, which kind of really helped them as well. So in terms of that, you know, Rome isn't built in a day, but they were building the emotional literacy skills that were going to take them through their whole life, and particularly going to help them when they were going through all the different transitions that forces children, you know, may face as part of deployment. The other thing we really looked at was imaginative play. So the other thing about emotions is And again, even as adults, I think if people ask you, how are you feeling? It can sometimes be quite difficult to answer. You want to have a chance to kind of like pick that apart. Um, we were really clear we didn't want to feel like we were either put in a position where we were trying to do something clinical that we weren't. So we were really clear, it's like, this is not play therapy. What this is about helping wee ones express themselves. But often that's about pretending different feelings, so practicing them, if that makes sense. And that's what imaginative play is really good for. So, we were always really careful to say that, say we were working with puppets one day, if they were really angry, and there was lots of really angry puppets, we were really careful to say that doesn't necessarily mean that they're angry about something and we need to dig deeper. Actually, we're really clear that play shouldn't be about that. We just need to meet the wee ones where they are. It may well have been there was there's something, but actually equally, maybe they just wanted to practice that. The really nice thing about exploring emotions through play, and through imaginative play in particular, is that if it does get a bit overwhelming or a bit tense, it's really easy to step back in a way that you can't if it was in a more kind of clinic. And also really important to say that none of us were coming with kind of specific kind of psychiatry or psychology backgrounds. So we were really clear to say, actually, it's about building the understanding and the practicing of those emotions. We have created loads of resources which now sit on the Starcatchers website. They're all free to access, which is really important to us because we realised that from the start it was never just about the children at Scott's Corner. We wanted to make sure that the ideas we were sharing were really flexible, that other nurseries could look at our resources and try different things without a lot of extra, super expensive kit, all that kind of thing. Although the one thing we did develop, actually, there was a kit towards the end, was we developed play kits. Because it was 2022 for most of this work, there were still COVID restrictions. It was quite difficult to work with families extensively. But we realised that when it came to play, there was kind of two kind of big needs that weren't necessarily being met. One was that if you're the stay-at-home parent and and all the parenting is on you 24/7 for long periods of time, particularly as that was during a pandemic or the tail end of, it can be really stressful. It can be really lonely. But also when you are really stressed, your playfulness can be the first thing to go. So we were really clear that we wanted to share play ideas that could be used in the home, that again were really accessible, that were low stress. I have vivid memories early on in the pandemic with all these play ideas coming up on social media. And I remember there being a box fort that some influencer in America that had built that was literally bigger than my living room. And I was like, this isn't helpful. This isn't helpful for anyone. So we were really clear that we want to create, we want to share play ideas at home that parents feel supported by and that they feel quite kind of low stress. The other thing we were really thinking about was the deployed parent. And we were saying, well, actually, it can be very difficult, particularly when they're young. You can go on deployment and your baby can be 18 months and then you come back and then they're 2. It can be huge in terms of their development. And we kind of knew from the Forces families we were able to talk to that could be quite difficult to then kind of re-establish that bond and to feel like you were kind of close again. So what we suggested with these play kits, it's about kind of open-ended materials and a booklet of ideas of ways to play with them. They sit within the setting. So the early years practitioners can use them with the wee ones, but the families can also borrow them. So we suggest that they borrow them before deployment. So the deployed parent gets a chance to kind of know what's in the kit and play, etc. The wee one can play with them in nursery, but then when the deployment's over, they can borrow the kit again. And it's almost like having kind of practical things to help reconnect with, which was really lovely. And we did, towards the end of the project, we had some lovely play sessions with parents, including deployed parents who were kind of coming in and giving us ideas for play that actually we wouldn't necessarily have kind of thought of ourselves. But I think it's that thing is like, you know, when you're a 6 foot squaddy, you can put your 3-year-old into some lycra and hold him with one hand in a way that physically we couldn't. So it was really, really lovely to have their kind of input there. Since then, we've, as you mentioned, we've had funding to work in Helensburgh. So we've been working with early year settings there. Again, looking at kind of play ideas to help with emotional literacy. One of our big kind of learning points from Scott's Corner, we realised that actually the adults need to have their own support around emotional regulation and emotional literacy. So this time, as we've been developing resources to share at home based on what we've been doing in the nurseries, what we've been doing is we've been anchoring each of the ideas we've been anchoring in kind of little ideas that can help parents or carers with their own emotional well-being as well. So an example I use quite often is you may be familiar with grounding techniques. So as an adult, we might be asked to, you know, take a moment and notice 5 things in the room and, you know, touch 4 things, you know, things like that are really like evidence driven, really great for adults, but don't work well for wee ones. So what we've done this time when we've developed the resources, is we'll say, okay, here's the adult version. Here's how you would do that. If you need to take 5 minutes to regulate yourself, this is it. Actually, for wee ones, it's probably more appropriate to be looking at sensory play. And then so we share lots of kind of sensory play ideas that go through all the kind of 5 senses as well. And I really hope that by doing that, what we're doing is we're anchoring what feels like quite silly things into quite a kind of tangible way for adults to understand why it's so important. You know, we never want people to be sitting with their 3-year-old and be like, okay, look at 5 things. Here's 5 ways. But it's just to try and make those connections a bit more. So yeah, we've had 1 year of delivery in Helensburgh, and we're just going into year 2. Which has been kind of really exciting. Again, more resources being developed, more they're all online. We're currently working on a podcast for that as well. And then we're just started in Murray now as well, which is really exciting. Up in Murray, we decided to focus more on the play kits. The local authority and the settings up there were really keen to develop the play kits. And the really nice thing is that we are no longer in COVID restriction times. So first phase is working with the nursery settings to start ideas for the play kits. And then in the new year, we'll be working with the families who'll be invited in to test out the play kits, get their own ideas in there. And of course, the wee ones will be part of that development all the way along. So it's really exciting that, you know, the resources that we're going to be developed, they're really closely shaped by the needs and interests of the wee ones that are taking part in all the sessions. But also it means that by the end, we should have, you know, play kits that you can kind of download and say, here's all the play ideas. You need some lycra or some inside of toilet rolls or whatever it is they decide to do. I have encouraged them to do things that are reusable or recyclable, so that you're not sitting there in 6 months' time going, I need how much flour? I need to do that kind of thing. But we shall see. But really, just a lovely project. Just lovely to be working with the settings. In Helensburgh, I've had the chance to chat to naval families about what their lives are like and what would be kind of useful for them, and the kind of the honesty and the generosity that we've been kind of shown there has been really, really lovely as well. So I'm not kind of forces family myself, but really kind of impressed and feel very much kind of like part of the different kind of communities as we've been working around, because people have been so generous with their time. So really hope that the resources that we share are really representative of what forces families are going through and what's actually useful for them.
Really helpful. We found the resources incredibly helpful. So thank you, Heather. And I think what you've touched on, without going into depth, which is probably for a whole different webinar actually, is that each forces family, of course, are unique in their own right. So experience deployments and separations and mobility differently, but actually each branch of the service experience it differently as well. So, you know, your army practitioner, your person in the army can tend to go away but stay in touch using WhatsApp. And so there are opportunities to create connections with those wee ones while they're away. Whereas if you're a submariner, you're away for 9 months and you've got no contact at all. And actually the RAF, that's an interesting one. They talk about those parents being fish and chip parents or fish finger parents, which I thought was a really interesting analogy when I first saw it. I thought, what do they mean? And actually, for lots of them, because so much warfare now is drone based and remote, so many of the RAF leave home in the morning. They go on to base. They are deployed for the day, either because the planes are scrambled, but they're back, or they go into a base and they sit using electronic drones and things, and then come home and put fish fingers on the table for their children. And how psychologically do they separate out that I've been in a war zone for however many hours today and now I'm needing to play with my children. I love that idea that what you've got there is a play kit that can be really adapted for different families needs. And I can understand why in Murray they perhaps were looking at those kits more than anything because they have a really different circumstance. But I think the other thing that really struck me, Heather, is again, parent of two neurospicy children, that sensory play and that needing to create that safety and sensory security before being able to explore those bigger emotions and how important that is. And just how do we help? I'm thinking for those people who've come back to deployment, they're probably also grappling with some really big emotions. So how do we support them to do their own piece and get themselves grounded and sort of, and I love that idea that you've got some parallels there between what works for an adult and what works for a child. And but how do we support them to do them when they're both perhaps not in great spaces at the same time?
Yeah. I mean, I'm also hoping that just by being able to immerse yourself within the play with your wee one, that's also really useful for your own mental health. But I recognise that people need to get to a certain point first. Some people do find it stressful. And again, we try and make sure in all our resources that we're sharing very much a give it a go. If it doesn't work, it's fine kind of attitude rather than this kind of perfectionist, anyone that's been on Pinterest and seen the beautiful finished project has felt that stress, and that's the last thing we want to do.
Yeah, because you're
I
right.
think I
Those
think
big
as
and giant forts are just crazy, aren't they? Sorry, Jude.
I think as well, it's just amazing listening to you talk, Heather, about, play just shouldn't stop when they leave nursery, and I think by doing that, developing those skills at such a young age, I just feel sometimes it just kind of disappears a wee bit when we go into primary. I mean, it is there in primary, but I think it's just fantastic to hear it's going on because hopefully it'll give parents that confidence. And even last night I was using a puppet with my 8-year-old and it was great. But again, it's the confidence of doing it. But play is it's just so important. And I think it's great that it is developed there, but it'd be amazing just to see it throughout, even as adults. So yeah, that was just something I picked up on though. But yeah, I'll be quiet now.
Thanks, Heather. And again, like Amy, I'm sure lots of people have lots of questions, but we'll save them to the end and give Sarah a little bit of an opportunity just now. But if you've got questions as they're occurring to them, do pop in the chat so we can come back to that. But Sarah, really keen to hear from you about that expertise that you bring from being that senior community development worker in the Army Welfare Service, that play can play a huge role in young people's confidence, in their growth, in their well-being, in when they're moving in and out of bases, in actually anchoring them into new communities, or perhaps celebrating them moving on to the next one. So really keen to hear from you about the role that play and hobbies feature in the work that you do. How do they matter? How do you encourage them to take part, and what difference do you see that they make, and perhaps some of the challenges that you will be uniquely aware of as you watch. We know that children in armies families particularly move much more frequently than the other branches, so you will be much more aware of that high mobility challenges that come with that.
Thanks. And I can kind of relate to a lot of what's being said here, because we obviously work with all ages. So, you know, where Heather's talking about the early years, you know, we're very keen to do that early start, and then we go all the way through. So the role of hobbies and play are so central to everything we do. And one of the beautiful benefits of being youth workers is we don't come pre-prescribed to anything. So we very much start at the point that the individual is at. So that can be whatever age, whatever kind of group they're from. You know, we work a lot with diverse communities, SEN, additional needs, young carers, everything. So we're very much looking at those people's individual needs and what it is they like, and you know, and the importance that has on their well-being and that transitional move. So I mean, the AWS has been around for many years, and we're still coming across families that say, we've never heard of you. We don't know what you do, because I think they don't see the role within the military as something particularly that's always there, but they are, you know. And I think when we look at children's physical, social and emotional development, that play role is key to how that works. And we encourage young people to come and get involved with the provision, but to give us the idea of what it is they would like. And we use play and we use you know, hobbies as ways to engage them initially, and then we give them that space to say, what should this session look like, what should this product look like, what do you want coming forward? And you know, everyone has a voice within that process, which is really, really key to what we do. And that's how you know, we're able to be really diverse in the way that we deliver work. So for instance, this morning we've started to do a lot of schools work and engage young people there, but I take board games. So I set them all up. I get 30 minutes with these young people, but it's not about the board games. It's about that opportunity to sit down over a game of Connect Four or a game of Uno, check in with them, see how their weekend's been, who's deployed, who's away, who's having any challenges or difficulties, and then have that work in partnership within the school with the pastoral support to say, are you aware that such and such this morning is having a really tough time? You know, parents been deployed or things like that. Or alternatively, we'd say to the young people, what is it you would like and how can we support you to do that? And you know, one of the schools, all the young people really wanted to go to Thorpe Park last year, and you know, with that partnership working, we were able to do that. And what they do is they form friendships with other service children supported through the school, and then as army welfare workers, the team will go with them and they work with them throughout the day, building relationships, understanding some of those difficult challenges, or just kind of giving them the space to say, come on, let's have some fun. Let's forget about whatever's going on at home or whatever's going on at school, and let's just be with each other. And, you know, those sorts of outcomes are kind of, you know, really measurable for us in terms of where we go with building that relationship with that young person, to then say, do you know, we've got this provision on, would you like to come to it? Because that building relationships can be so challenging for us when they're so transient. And you know, we do multiple kind of programs and projects, and you know, it again, we've got the youth voice that are engaged with us, giving us you know, their lead. And what I wanted to talk about a little bit here is the change in ages that we're recognizing through play. So I think there's an assumption that when children get to a certain age that you know, it's all about kind of education, learning, employment, but it's not. And we're working more and more with our 16 to 18-year-olds, keeping that play involved in that and that creative side, because what we've done, what schools do, is they kind of remove it with that, with all the kind of study and how academic the expectation is. And, you know, secondary school, from the minute young people get there, especially in England, I think Scotland do it a little bit better from my experience, but England, they just feel the pressure of got to do this homework, that homework, I've got no time for anything. And we do some time management workshops about, actually, guys, your play space and your free space is so key to your mental health and well-being. And if you're not giving space for that, then that's going to impact on everything. So how can we help you to put that together in a timetable and then say, in actual fact, I've done that, and you know, this is now my time to engage with other people, my time to play, my time to do other hobbies and get out and get involved. And you know, I think young people forget how important that is to them at that age. And this year especially, we did residentials, and the young people told us, you know, we get to 16 and everybody just assumes then we're kind of adults, and they say, oh, you know, there's no more provision for you, there's no more residentials. So we're now moving those boundaries and saying, okay, what do you want? And yeah, come along. So we took loads of 16 to 18-year-olds on residential this year and provided that safe space, which is key, with a group of their peers, and had the best week away, where, you know, their free time is spent, where we provide equipment, sports equipment, crafts, games, and they just will mix together and choose where it is they'd like to be, and then staff will interact with them in that space. And you know, the feedback, we did make it a digital free zone. It was a digital detox residential. There were no phones allowed, and as a result of that, you know, the feedback from the young people was it was by far the best week they'd had. And I think also because nobody had contact with them, because I think sometimes through that space, you know, they're constantly monitored these days, teenagers, they're constantly, their parents are like, what are you doing, feedback, and they just had that freedom and that space to just be young people again and enjoy nature and enjoy the outdoors, take part in things, and for their health and well-being, it had such a positive impact on them. And they connected with each other because they didn't have that external input from other things going on, so they just had each other, and they had the best time. They created a disco night, and you know, dressed up, and all with, we didn't take a lot of resources for these things, they just create them themselves, and they tell us what it is that they would like. So I think, you know, it's for their personal development and their brain development, play is so key for them, you know. And we have a lot of our young people that go on to be young leaders and youth volunteers, and when you take them into that environment with younger children, you know, that ability to just shed any kind of, you know, stereotype and play superheroes with the younger ones, and you know, really role play and enjoy. And with, even from Youth Voice, we use multi-use spaces, so we work out of a nursery. And I used to think, oh, I wish they would stop playing with that play kitchen, you know, they're like 14 years of age, but in actual fact we just left all the stuff there, and they just automatically will role play with it, include it in what they're doing, they use it in some of the things they talk about and play about, you know. And we do a lot of Warhammer and Dungeons and Dragons, and you know, D&D and stuff like that, and the young people have got a great imagination, and they will utilize all those provisions that are within a nursery setting within their role play, and it's great to see. And I think it's really important, and I think for especially for the teenagers, it's important to hold on to that and say, actually, this is okay to do this, we encourage this, you know, there's some resources there, build something, you know, let's go back into the woods. Because I think as soon as people see a group of teenagers out playing, there's an assumption they're doing something they shouldn't be. So, you know, providing a safe space for them to do that, and resources and people to support that, I think has been really, really important and really key. And I think we talked a lot about the barriers for service life. I think a lot of people covered, you know, obviously the normal ones, transport. I know it's in Scotland especially, it was a huge impact because the children couldn't stay at school and play the extracurricular activities because they couldn't get home afterwards. That was key. We have it here in some of the areas we work. There's limited transport. School's really far away, so if you don't finish and get the school bus home, you're not getting home. home and you're miles away. We also find that obviously we have limited school places here, so children going to school out of area, so your friends in school don't live anywhere near you anymore. So how do you then make friendship groups? So I think things like the provision that we offer enables them to do that. And when we work in schools, we provide just service children only provision, and we find that there are young people come to the group that live on the same street that didn't even know they live near each other, and they make that connection through the work that we do that way. And I think that's really, really important. And we know, you know, waiting lists are hard. Children in our area can't get into things like swimming lessons. Young people are reluctant to get into long-term things like maybe theatre clubs and stuff like that, because what happens if you move before the production? And you know, that's and also what it comes socially and emotionally, what that does for you when you've made all those connections and those friends, and then you've got to leave them behind, you know. But we talk to them, having had that lived experience, about, you know, making the most of every area you go. You know, you should have a look and just try new things and say, yes, let's have a go at that, because in actual fact, that lived experience will benefit you all the way through. You know, when I lived in London, I grew up till about the age of 11, and I did a lot of theatre and dance because that was what it laid itself to. And then when I moved to the Midlands, into the country, as you like, from London, I didn't do any of that. I learned to horse ride, and you know, I joined the local pony club, and you know, did all that kind of stuff and mucked out, and you know, and then when I went somewhere else, I did karate and swimming. So you know, there's lots of benefits to moving if you maximize on what's in your area and say, in actual fact, I'm going to give it a go. And you know, I talk to them all the time about 20 seconds of bravery, because that's all it takes for you to go and say hello. And service children are great with other service children. When we go on residential, we take young people from all over that have never met each other, and people say, I can't believe, you know, you're going to take them away, you don't even know them. But within a day, those young people will all have mixed. They will all have met each other. They will all have shared an experience, because we provide that safe space. We provide that nurturing environment for them to be able to do that. And because service children have, you know, a shared interest, a shared commonality. So that's really key for them, I think. You know, we talk a little bit, some of you talked about the barriers to living behind the wire. And we kind of, within our youth voice, raise that with commanding officers, because they think that young people should feel really safe because they live behind this fence. And in actual fact, they just see it as a prison, with a prison guard on the front with a gun, you know, and how do I get my friends in? And if I forget my pass, I can't get in. And, you know, trying to break down some of those barriers and make it a little bit easier for their friends to access and come to and from, so they have that freedom. And the same to reinforce for parents that actually it's safe for the young people to go outside of that gate, you know, and just, you know, how do we put strategies in to enable you to do that, so they can access the local play park, or they can access meeting up with their friends, and that's okay to do. I think some areas have got great green space. We are very fortunate within the military to have that. You know, some areas that I work in, you know, the young people will naturally migrate down to the play park. It's about making sure that that space is safe for them, and that, you know, parents feel assured that that's a good space, and you know, things are happening there for them. So we often go out and do street play, and take equipment and provide free self-directed free play, which young people love. We provide, you know, weekly regular sessions, bespoke projects, residentials. We've done things like a dads and kids residential from parents coming back from deployment, which was really, really great. And we took them away to a really beautiful residential centre, and obviously the welfare team came, AWS went, we cooked for them, and they had activities, and they had a big bonfire, and you know, they just got time to reconnect and spend time with their dads. Particularly, I mean, only because the regiment we worked with are predominantly male. I mean, there was no stipulation to that, but when we spoke to the young people and said, what did you most want, that was what they asked for: more time with the serving soldier, just to play football or just to have time with them, and that connection, and that having something you know, in common. And that's why we run things like the Games Club, the Warhammer Club, because the dads and lads come along, the dads and children come along, and they play it together, and it gives them something to talk about and share, and something they can go home and do afterwards as well, you know, and share painting their soldiers and their tanks and things like that. But yeah, so I think, you know, it's really, really important to connect the parents and the young people in these environments, and make sure that it's not just one or the other, and giving opportunities for everyone. And we've started things like an SEN youth provision now, specifically for neurodiverse young people, and they can come with their families, and we've got bespoke activities and opportunities for them as well, because that's what they've asked us for, you know. And we're able to do that. That's a luxury that we have, that we don't have a pre-prescribed program. We can do anything. We're talking today, the young people asked for some photography, so we're going to run a photography project, and the young people will have access to that resource and be able to go out and have a look at what's in their area, and then feed that back to other young people, because we know that, you know, especially in the winter when it's dark, even in an area like Aldershot, young people won't come out. They don't feel safe. They tell us at 4 o'clock, I don't feel safe to come to youth club. Transport to get to and from places can be a challenge for young people here. They do like to be picked up, and they do like to be dropped off. And if we run transport, we always get a real huge take up, because maybe the parents working and the other parents deployed, or they've got younger siblings and parents can't come and pick them up at like 8, 9 o'clock at night, that kind of thing.
So think about those really practical things, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And making sure you're putting the resources all into the correct place, really. You know, and the new housing model as well is having a huge impact, I think, on families, because they've lost that identity and that sense of connection. And whereas a regiment would have had all the families, and you would know other children, and you might grow up with other children, now you're living all over. You don't even necessarily live near where you work, and parents aren't really having that connection, so they're isolated. So invariably they will also feel like their children potentially are feeling isolated. And also we're seeing a huge uptake of homeschool children, so providing that space for parents to bring them along so they can get involved in other things. Otherwise they're not having any connection with anybody.
You know, Sarah, I'm going to pick the conversation up with you about homeschool another day, because it's coming up lots in our conversations lately too, and needing to have a think about that. I think what strikes me though is what you've talked about, and there's almost a theme running through what everyone's talked about, which is that importance of play at testing out new things, trying out something different, trying out to figure out how you're feeling or what those big emotions are, or finding an opportunity to be a little brave. And actually, apart from those more practical things that it gives us, that strikes me as the common theme between what everyone has said here. And for Forces children, I think, who are asked to be brave so often as the next move happens, or their parent deploys, or all of those things, finding those ways to foster opportunities to test out that bravery in really safe and fun ways is so important, isn't it? Like, play is obviously important for all children, but it has struck me today just how much for children who maybe have had disrupted childhoods. Your example of going into the nursery and playing the nursery equipment, that struck me as when I used to work with care experience young people. They often did that because what they were doing was going back and rehearsing something that they felt like they had missed somewhere. Like it's such an interesting opportunity. And how do we do that preventative work that you're talking about, Heather, around building those skills from an early age of understanding emotions and being able to work through that? But how do we do a bit of that reactive stuff that you're talking about, Sarah, that for those children that have had gaps at various points, or moves at key points, or losses at key points, how do we use play, not in a therapeutic way, because you're right, Heather, we're not therapists, but how do we use it in a way that lets them be a little bit daring and a little bit playful about sorting that out? So yeah, really helpful, Sarah. Thank you. I wonder, I know I'm going to put you on the spot, Claire. Fiona is our audience, but do you have questions for Jude, Heather, Amy, Sarah, anyone?
I don't think I have any questions actually, but I find this really, really interesting actually. And I keep relating it back to what we do in books actually. And I think that reading, I mean, I don't need to sort of sell reading to anybody, but it's so fundamental from the point of view, it can really stimulate a child's imagination. I think that's the great thing about books, isn't it? And I've got a little granddaughter here who's 3.5. And I mean, we all know how reading to children from a very young age is so important, but so much of her role play is focused around the books that she's read. And you just know, I mean, she plays being the highway rat, she plays being all these wonderful Julia Donaldson characters, but it all stems from reading. And so I think, that reading and play can really work very well together. I don't want to take up too much time, otherwise I'll just start rambling. But so yeah, I mean, it's absolutely brilliant. I think the work that everybody's doing, Sarah and Heather and you at Foster Children Scotland is amazing. So if there's anything that we can do to help that brings in a book, because obviously it's a hobby as well, isn't it? For a lot of kids.
Absolutely.
It's a hobby. And I think the one thing about our resources is there's no barriers to them. They're freely available all the time, wherever they are. It doesn't matter whether you're behind the wire or, but I suppose the barriers is just reaching children. And that's where we rely on people like you. And Heather, actually, just very quickly, we have a new resource. When you were talking about the grounding, it's just a wee plug here. We have a new resource for adults. So it's just to make you aware, it's part reading journal, but part wellbeing journal. And it's exactly that. In the wellbeing bit, there is a grounding activity, the five things, which is exactly what you're talking about. So if you're working with families and you're working with adults, then you're very welcome to order these. If they don't use the reading bit, that's fine. But if you think that the well-being half, where they can do a few exercises and write about it, if you think that would help you to be able to give this out as well as part of what you're doing, then just give us a shout, actually. So, but thank you. It's I think what everybody's doing is really interesting, actually. And Amy, what you're doing is, the research, that was really interesting as well. I've got two grandsons in Sweden. And they, I don't know what they're doing there, but it sort of seems as if they're very much on the sort of Finnish model as well, where play is very important. And of course, in these countries, they go to school slightly later, so perhaps there's more scope there for playing for a bit longer. I'm not very sure about that, but anyway. So thank you. I'll let somebody else speak now.
Thanks, Fiona.
Claire, I've got a quick
unmuted.
one.
Yeah,
I think I'm all right now. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
It's just, I'm just aware of time. It's got a really, really quick one. A lot of the families that I work with, they are married unaccompanied, so they're all over the place. So their families are nowhere near them, and they're out, in the civilian world, but living a military life, and they really, really struggle to access the sort of thing that Sarah was talking about, because they just don't know it's there, and they just don't think it's accessible. So that's where our struggle is, because they're married unaccompanied, their partners aren't around, they haven't got any family nearby, and they just really struggle to find those resources. I think that's where their issue is, that they haven't got the support of the actual camps. Does that make sense? Am I talking?
Absolutely. I totally relate to that. And again, with the new housing model, we're seeing a lot of families not moving at all. And therefore, how do we reach them? So we tend to utilise their welfare teams and try and get them to put out some questionnaire, just so families know that everything is open and accessible to them. And we can link them with other areas as well. Their young people and their families should not be disadvantaged disadvantage because they don't live next to the camp they work at all. And I think, you know, there is an assumption that they're settled and therefore there's no requirement, but there is, because those families need to connect.
Yeah,
And,
I think, no, you're right, Sarah, because I had that. We moved away because my husband was in the army for 15 years. And I work with Navy families now with children with SEND and autism. And they've just really struggled to get that support. They really have. And when I moved, went married on a company, my husband was in one part of the country and I was all on my own in another part of the country, didn't know anybody. And it felt like it was out of sight, out of mind. And I didn't hear from, my husband was deployed for 9 months. Guess how many times I heard from welfare?
Yeah, never.
0. I heard nothing. And I could have been absolutely and and I'm getting this a lot with the families that I work with as well. They're just not getting that support. And even going out into the civilian world, who don't understand the world that we're in either, makes it doubly difficult.
I do feel for you. And I think one of the things we've looked at with one of the units, particularly the Grenadier Guards, was they everybody will have their family's day, won't they, within the year, or the regimental day, is actually making it an event, like a weekend event, where you put on a whole load of accessibility. So people it's worth them traveling from wherever they live to come and be part of it for the whole weekend. And that could be that you rent somewhere that's got a residential place, or I mean, in Aldershot specifically, we've got a really great outward bound centre where you can glamp. So just book out the whole glamping site. The families can go there. You have a barbecue on the Friday and do something, because the men all go to a dinner on the Friday night, or the serving soldier goes to a dinner. Then on the Saturday, you've got a complete families day. And then on Sunday, you do like a big breakfast or a big brunch before everybody goes off and put some activities on. So it's worth them putting the petrol in the car and driving all the way down for the families day, because it's worth it for the weekend. And then trying to put on as much as we can to connect with them and make sure those families have got access to everything they need, because you are absolutely there's such a large population now that live like this and don't move with their units at all, and they're really missing out on the opportunity of everything they could have, because we're not quite reaching them. And what can we do to make that better? And I think it's a really interesting piece that we talk about a lot in AWS, how we do that. Is it that the workers need to go to those areas and do something, it is a work in progress, but it is also very much unit, kind of based, because some units are very good at it and other units, might be like so huge. Like we have 27 Reg, which is, RLC, and it's so big, it just is really, really difficult. But, it's, through little acorns grow big trees. Even if it only reaches a few, at least it's a few we weren't reaching before.
Yeah, I think it's a really valuable thought that we need to have, though, doesn't it? As families become more and more dispersed, and we do get more and more money married unaccompanied, what does the role of play look like for those children who maybe only, I mean, I'm thinking about your children, even Jude, only 1 or 2 children in a forces school, all of those things, but yet are impacted by forces life on a day-to-day basis. So really having a think about what that looks like. I'm conscious we're 6 minutes over. Sorry, bad chairing on my part. Does anyone have any sort of final thoughts or questions that they want to come in with? Jude's computer has completely frozen, apart from the video bit, which is great because we've kept her, but it has meant she's not been able to pop the QR code for the evaluation in the chat, but she'll email that out, and we'll email out all of the links that people have popped in the chat as well today. So this is your last opportunity if anyone wants to come in with some thoughts.
Can I just say that I think stuff like this is really important, that connection, that listening to people that you wouldn't necessarily hear from, and seeing, up and down the country and sharing those lived experiences, because I think this has really been invaluable. Just some of the reports that are coming out here that we perhaps not have had access or seen to, and it's great. I mean, obviously Forces Children Scotland, you're an advocate for Forces Children, and we follow and pinch a lot of your resources continually, and we're really grateful for that, and we're really fortunate that we have had the opportunity to work with you, and I think this is really key, and I think this is the way forward, is more connection with everybody, really.
Oh, thanks, Sarah.
Amazing. And thank you all so much for attending it. I've really enjoyed it. It's been really good. It's been lovely to hear from everyone. So,
and Amy, keen to talk to you about how we can make a hobby guarantee for Forces children work for Forces children. So keen to keep that conversation going. We are doing a bit of work with Young Scott just now too. We've got a funding bid in, hoping to do a pack for Forces children, specifically moving into Scotland around the Young Scott card and things like that. So I think there's some joined up bits we can do in there.
Definitely, we'll have another chat.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Amy. Well, thank you, everyone.